I'm gonna be boxing blueberry.
Alright, I make some of my own tree ornaments every year, and I usually make a video about them. This year is no different. Let's start off with something fairly easy, I'm going to say. Some air dry clay. Any air dry clay will work, but I use the stuff that dries down and shrinks, which was a little bit of a problem, but that problem was mostly solved. Anyways, I digress. I rolled out a fairly thin slab of it, enough to cover this Christmas ornament. That actually gave me the idea, and I basically just wrapped up the entire ornament except the top, using my hands and fingers specifically with water on them to soften the edges and make everything basically more uniform. Also, with this idea, you definitely don't have to stop with the creation of a blueberry. With any shape ornament, you could do any fruit, vegetables, etc. I've seen some oddly shaped ornaments out there, but I also wanted to take advantage of having the stem be at the top, so I made the hanging piece right in the middle and used a few tools to open up the area around it, while simultaneously using my finger to make sure the walls didn't fall down or break, as this air dry clay is very flimsy. I rolled out a very thin snake of clay and used that to make the inner portion of the blueberry stem, placing some water in to blend it out a little bit, again with a tool. Now, you could leave this anywhere to dry, but I find when working with air dry clay, I like to leave my pieces overnight with a damp cloth on top of them so they don't dry as quickly, therefore they're less prone to cracking as much. I also do this with the bigger pieces and leave them for longer, as I did with my anatomically correct heart vase, if you guys saw that one. Now for the paint job. Mixing up multiple blues while referencing multiple photos of blueberries. I first did an overall base coat of a custom blue. I made the color a little bit darker and painted the inside, or like the stem portion area. And then used a disposable cosmetic sponge that I ripped up pieces of to sponge on some more color variation around the blueberry. And to seal it all as I do, I used a thin coat of resin once that was dry. And hung it to cure.
How did these come out of the same size pack? I don't understand.
Next, we're moving on to some oven baked clay. You may also be able to do this with air dry clay, but I wanted to make it a little bit more sturdy than air dry clay allows. So I started off with my various scraps of tinfoil from other projects and placed them together to create a whatever you'd call the shape. I conditioned some oven baked clay and rolled it out to maybe like a 1/4 of an inch thick and folded that in half onto itself, obviously doubling it in thickness. Then taking a bowl that I will eventually be using for another something down the road to make out where the circle would be, and I cut that out. Then I placed the foil in the middle and grabbed both sides of the circle, folded them in on each other like a soft taco, and pushed one into the other. I'm not going to be blending these, I just want to make sure these sides stick to the other sides. And then I'm softening the edges with my fingers and also using multiple ball stylus tools to create indents in the clay. Then I knew I would be hanging this from a hook, so I added that into the top portion to create the indent. And added bacon bond into the indent and then stuck the hook back in. So when I actually bake this, it'll be stuck for good. I then used more oven baked clay and some acrylic paint and used them together to basically just make like a really muddy brown. To make some fake chocolate chips. I rolled out a little piece into a small ball and sort of like pinched the top of it with my 2 fingers, and then I bend it either way. Then it was time to put them in the oven. Once they were cold to the touch, I painted the shell with a yellow-brown mix. And then hung it to dry in the most MacGyver kind of way possible. And with a disposable sponge, honestly probably the same one I used to begin with, but for the rip down from the blueberry, I dabbed just the brown onto the edges. Finally, it was time for the filling. That consists of literally just spackle. I placed a large spatula full into a piping bag with a piping tip, and as the name would suggest, I piped it. About half on each side, as I had left the tin foil in to both keep the shape when it was baking and to fill it, so I would be needing less spackle, because tin foil is a lot less expensive than spackle.
Oh god, I feel like that one looks really bad. Okay. At least I can take it out easy. Nice.
Once I had as much filling as I wanted, I added those faux chocolate chips into the spackle before they dried and really pushed them in to make them as secure as possible. But once those dried down, I coated it in a thin layer of resin once again and let it cure.
Run, run, run as fast as you can. You can't catch me. I'm the gingerbread man! No, not the buttons! Not my gumdrop buttons!
Next up was the foam clay, and I hadn't realized I used so many different clays for these, I swear. And used a reference photo for our sweet little friend and a piece of plastic film over top, and I drew him out to the size I wanted him to be with a whiteboard marker. Used that brown oven-baked clay and added purple into it to color it further and shaped it into some gumdrop buttons, as well as used some more oven-baked clay for the eyes and the icing pieces on his arms and, let's say, like the belt area, I guess. As those baked, I started with some foam clay
Ooh, caught that.
and just shaped his body as I had made the outline. Being sure to cut into the legs with scissors, tweezers, and eventually stabbed into them because this ornament will technically be 2 pieces stuck into one. I placed the now hardened pieces of oven-baked clay into their respective spots and took them out so the indent will be there, but I can secure them better after the paint job. This is also where I finally got started on the little feet, giving them the same treatment as the layer that they were ripped away from. And then placing very teeny tiny O-hooks into the top and the bottom pieces, so the legs and the feet, 2 each, so 8 altogether, as this will be what allows them to actually connect. remembering very quickly that they need to face the opposite way, so I turn them. Adding the last hook into the top of the head. This foam clay does take longer to dry than air dry clay, however the surface is usually fairly okay to paint after a couple of hours, so I definitely took advantage of that. An overall gingerbread color. And then set that up like a cool kid at recess to further dry down. And give the back also a chance to dry as well, to actually give it some air. And adding a black into the mix to kind of just darken up the edges a little bit. I also added the same darker color to the torn limbs, kind of giving it a texture to the color as well. I finally added the faux candy back on with some E6000. Then for the icing portions though, I used a dotting tool to push into the clay and actually like break it a little bit. And then adding glue onto the oven baked pieces, placed it onto the area I just worked on and held it for a few seconds. This gives it a better place to go in case the clay just expanded a little bit too much and altered its original placement, and it also gives it a little bit more texture for the glue to hold on to. For the eyebrows and the mouth, I used a blue and red fabric paint to emulate the blue and red icing. The same blue and red I actually used on the Silent Hill nurse. How the times have changed. To attach the feet to the legs, I used a very thin gauged wire. I wrapped it around the leg portion, the O-ring at least, and I secured it down with a few more wraps around itself. And then added a few very tiny beads. Some black, some light brown, some translucent brown kind of. No! No! And some gold to act as kind of like fancier looking crumbs and to give the ornament more like visual interest. Once I had about a ½ inch of wire left at the bottom, I placed it through the feet O-ring and wrapped it around itself again and then cut off the excess.
I know what a TV dinner feels like. Come to the coast, we get together, have a few laughs.
Oh look, the next ornament doesn't even involve clay at all. I printed off this beauty from the interwebs, a special Christmas movie scene, and cut it out. To build up around it and give it some dimension, I used some bristle board, using the image to kind of just reference the size and cutting it down with an X-Acto knife, and it sounds so good. I simply glued the pieces together with hot glue around the edges, and then took some tin, which was actually just originally a can of Pepsi that I cut up and used its tin from. Cut that down to size and hot glued it onto the newly built frame and placed the tin in there. With a palette knife, I pressed it down around all the edges. You can definitely use like tin foil for this, as reusing tin like this can be a little bit scary, and you should be wearing the proper protective equipment like gloves and whatnot, and still be very careful because it is going to be very sharp. I wrapped it from one side all the way around and to the other. Continued this on each wall. Simply scoring it with an X-Acto knife and bending it at the score line to actually break it through. The only portion that was not actually covered at the end were the corners and the back of the ornament. For the corners though, I simply used a silver acrylic paint and heavily added that on. For the back, as it had the edges of tin showing, I did more hot glue to the edges so they were fully covered. No chance to actually like cut myself on them or anything, and then added the photo onto the back and again secured it down with my palette knife. To add the hanger to it, I used the smallest drill bit that I own and drilled about halfway across the top, so basically just like in the middle, into the tin and through the bristle board, but I made sure to stop before I came through on the other end. I had these wires that are actually used for like hanging ornaments. I just got them from the dollar store. They're super easy to manipulate, so I added a generous dollop of glue onto the end and pushed it into the hole, then added one singular silver bead from the same pack of beads I used for my last one on top.
Please, I'm a star!
Whew. Lastly, in honor of my Pearl, Maxine, and X video, the triple threat from my Halloween series, I thought this would be appropriate. When I printed out Mr. John McClane, I also printed out Little Miss Pearl here. So I cut out her photo as well. And using more of that tin, I cut a triangular template out and used that to make sure all of the points of the star would be the same size. I outlined it 3 times, actually technically more, but then I realized I only actually needed it 3 times. That I could flip it on itself to get the exact match, so I did that instead. I then used a glue stick to place our lovely pearl onto the paper star. And then use the paper star to make an exact outline on more bristle board. Put that off to the side and then cut out the thicker outline of the star. I used a piece of tin once again, bringing it down just a little bit so I was able to trace out the inner outline but still have it be the same kind of dimensions, if that makes sense. And then I cut that out. This will give the star some dimensions and a place to actually hide the lighting. I used first a glue stick to get an immediate stick and then also E6000 for future results as well. And then I stuck pearl down on the star outline face up. Once that had time to dry overnight, I added some fairy lights onto the back. At first I thought I could just place them down and they would be kind of like a removable situation, and if it were any other pack I probably could have. But I have no idea where I got these, and they were longer than I have ever worked with before, so I ended up just hot gluing them into each corner and then the middle to secure them. Now, if you've seen my Christmas tree, which has made an appearance a few times in this video, you will notice that I don't have a tree star for it. And if you hadn't caught on yet, she's it. A proper star just like the one she always wanted to be. So I needed a way to actually add her on top. I took a thicker wire I had and placed it up into the star's bottom, butt, whatever, and then used a wire cutter to bend it as a tree topper would be, being sure to test it on top of my actual Christmas tree, dry fitting it. Then I hot glued the top portion of the metal framing and added it into the butt for good. With the excess fairy light string, I wrapped that around the thicker wire base more times than I care to count. Yeah. And then I thought the edges seemed a little bit boring, so I also added some sequins that was kind of like on its own thread to that, just with hot glue. I added pink because it's the closest thing to red, the perfect red pearl color, onto the edges. And then use silver onto the outer edges as well, again with hot glue. Oh my god. Hit my hand and it's literally, I don't know if you guys can see that. There's a mark. If you're thinking to yourself, that looks so incredibly bad and cheaply made, that's because it's supposed to. But that is it for today's video. I do hope you guys enjoy. Merry Christmas.